What's up, Coachable family? Welcome back to the Coachable podcast. I'm your host, Tori Gordon, and this is your place to get game-changing advice for the game of life so that you can level up in life and business. And today is going to be an epic episode because I have a dear, dear friend of mine in studio here in Vegas. Jake Kauffman's in the house and has traveled all the way from Atlanta, Georgia to be here. Jake, welcome to the studio. Thanks for being here.
Tori, thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, this is not your first time on the show.
This is not.
This is the second, maybe the third time that you've been on the show. I think
this is
actually
the
this is the
third time.
third. So this is a treat. You know, anytime I get to like have a returning guest, it just gets better and better because we keep going deeper. And this time it's very special because we're celebrating the release of your new book.
We are, yeah.
Let Love In, you guys, is out. I've had my copy since the early release, but I'm very, very excited to sit down with you and talk about the inspiration for this book and your story a little bit and what people can expect from it. Because the tagline is "The pain stops when the truth starts." I'm curious, just like tell us what's the inspiration behind writing this book?
Well, the inspiration was to do just that. It was to inspire other people to step into their growth and healing journey so that they could fulfill their potential, live their purpose, and step into their power.
Yeah. Yeah. Let Love In, that is a really powerful title. And I think it evokes an emotion for anybody that sees like your face and your expression and then reads this title and is like, okay, how do I let love in? And why would I want to? I know why I would want to, but what
Sure.
was the inspiration for the title of this book?
Well, we all have a threshold of what we feel safe to receive when it comes to love, financial abundance, opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Anything beyond that exceeds that threshold is going to inherently feel unsafe and feel like a threat in our system.
Mm.
So when we talk about love and letting love in, I think Rumi said it best, to be honest with you, when he said, our task is not to seek love. It is to seek after and find the barriers that exist between us and love.
Mm. Yeah, that's so true. And there are many.
Many. Yeah. I mean, most of these things go back to childhood, of course, and the beliefs that we picked up from childhood and unreconciled pain from the past that prevents us from receiving love and therefore giving love in return.
Yeah. What do you think is like the main like theme of this book? Is it really about looking at all the things that are in between us and the love that we want to experience in our lives?
The way that I like to put it is this book is about me, but it's not meant for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant for other people who have suffered through abuse or assault or any type of abuse for that matter, because when you think about it, all of us have suffered from trauma,
Right.
whether it's emotional, physical, or otherwise, because trauma is much more about how we internalized what has happened to us as opposed to the actual events themselves.
Right.
It's these beliefs, these stories that we create as a result of what we've been through in the past that we continue to carry around and that dictate our behavior. And our behavior, of course, directly dictates our actions and our decisions. And so that's why people have such a difficult time changing, because the ego, the false self that we create, because, well, that's who we need to become in order to be loved, accepted, and successful. The ego would always rather be right about what doesn't serve us than wrong about what does.
Yeah. Speak a little bit more about that ego. How do you define the ego?
So the ego is the false self,
Mhm.
like I mentioned, or the admired identity.
Mm-hmm.
It's who we think we need to become in order to be loved, accepted, admired, and successful.
Yeah.
But it's not who we truly, genuinely are. It's not our authentic self. It's who we think we need to be. And so our personality is this amalgamation of genuine traits and characteristics, of course, but also these adaptive traits and these compensating strategies that are specifically and intrinsically designed to avoid pain, to avoid being rejected, to avoid abandonment, to avoid being a failure. The problem is for most people is that all of these compensating strategies and adaptive strategies are unconscious.
Right.
Our unconscious mind dictates 90 to 95% of our behavior. So when you think about that, you realize very quickly that our personality is not who we are, it's who we've become.
Mm-hmm. Who we think we need to be. I'm
Right.
curious, who did you grow up thinking Jake needed to be in order to experience or receive love?
Well, I certainly thought I needed to be someone else than who I truly am, that's for
Right.
sure. For context purposes, the book starts off, and you know this because you know my story very well, but for those who don't, my story kicks off with me acknowledging that what happened to me when I was roughly 12 or 13 was sexual abuse.
Mm.
And all of the different ways in which I masked in an effort to self-protect to ensure that that event never happened again.
Mm.
And so it started having me show up as if I had it all together, as if I was successful, as if I was fine, right? I'm fine.
Right.
Which I think a lot of people can relate to. How many people do you ask, how are you doing? And they're like, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are you really though?
Mm-hmm.
And so I unconsciously and consistently, meticulously started to craft this persona that had it all together in an attempt to not be hurt again. Because if I had it all together and I projected that image out into the world, you couldn't hurt me, or you would be dissuaded from trying to take advantage of me.
Mm.
The problem is nobody ever got to know the real me.
Right.
And so I was consistently pushing love away. I was holding people at arm's length because I was terrified of intimacy and deep connection. Because after I was abused, those things started to feel threatening in my system.
Mm.
So it created this very confusing relationship with love, with intimacy, with connection, with vulnerability, which I think objectively we can all agree is the doorway to better relationships
Sure.
and more fulfilling intimacy and love. But that's what trauma does. It fractures, it creates this fracture in this confusing relationship with things that actually serve us that all of a sudden start to feel like a threat, but are not.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a self-protective coping strategy to ensure that we never get hurt again.
Right, right. It's this, the defenses and the barriers that we end up, the walls that we build around our hearts.
Right.
But as much as we think that that keeps pain out, it also doesn't let love in, to the point of the naming of your book.
Correct. It's effective in terms of protecting us, but it's ineffective in terms of allowing us to go deeper in love and intimacy and connection. And this is true for everything, like I talked about, whether it's financial abundance, whether it's opportunity, whatever you're looking to expand into or experience more of in your life. And so for me, I found myself only being able to go to a certain depth or degree in relationship before naturally I would need to self-sabotage, which is just to say I would need to self-protect because my system came online and communicated to me that this is a threat, this level of connection and intimacy and vulnerability is a threat, and therefore we need to self-protect and we need to remove you from this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as you can probably imagine, I would find every conceivable reason to end a relationship, which I think a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah.
But yeah, if we're talking about love, we first need to talk about if we want to increase in love or increase our capacity to receive love and give love in return, we have to talk about the barriers, like you mentioned, that stand between us and doing so.
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about this internal conflict that we can all experience, right? This the conflict of two different desires: the desire to protect ourselves and the desire to be close.
Right. The way that I like to put it is there's a lack of congruence between your conscious desires and your unconscious beliefs. When that happens, your lyrics aren't going to match your music.
Mm.
And so despite what you say you want, on some level, you are unable to create it, receive it, manifest it, whatever it is that you want to say, because you have unreconciled pain from the past that you are simply recycling in the present moment. And as a result of that, you are constantly running into a block. It's a round peg square hole situation because your beliefs don't match what you're trying to achieve. There's fear there. There's some type of internal resistance or conflict within yourself because you haven't fully integrated and healed that pain.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know everyone listening can think of something that they want or have desired in their life and felt like for whatever reason it just felt impossible to actually get there. And
Right.
they kept running into the same kind of like issue. And for you identified it as some kind of pattern within your romantic relationships is
Right.
I would get just this close, and then the pattern might be that I would self-sabotage, or I would end the relationship prematurely, or I would run away.
Right.
What was the catalyst for you to start to identify your own pattern with kind of keeping people in love at arm's length?
hmm
How did that show up for you?
Well, I began to catch on to the fact that, okay, I'm running into this same package, different bow situation where where I'm,
Yeah.
I'm playing out the same pattern, like you mentioned, in different relationships, and it's consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And although I didn't have this language for it at the time, what I would say, I've probably said this to you before in our private conversations, where the pattern always reveals the problem.
Yeah.
And so as I started to notice this as a pattern, because it didn't just show up in my romantic life, it started to show up when it came to my career and in business. I would create this initial success, but then eventually I would sabotage that success. I mean, I've been fired from every professional job I've ever had.
Mm.
And so this forced me into doing deeper introspective work within myself to determine, okay, what is behind this? What is motivating this behavior? I feel like I'm a passenger in my own body. I'm doing that which I don't want to do. I'm not creating the results that I want in my life. I feel on some level powerless or incapable of doing so. Although I know I have the potential, I'm simply not able to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why. And so that was when I started down my path of personal development and healing that ultimately led me to acknowledging this event when I was 12 or 13 as sexual abuse. And in that moment, I was able to connect the dots because I was able to see how that event, in many ways and by and large, shaped my personality and who I became as a result of it.
Right. How did you come to that realization and to start to connect to the dots and to reveal this deeply painful, traumatic, intimate thing
Mhm.
that you experienced? Was that something you came to terms with and connected on your own? Was it through therapy? Like, what was your road to connecting those dots?
So I'm a firm believer that every hero needs a guide. And
Mm.
so once I determined, okay, I need to dig a little bit deeper here and do some self introspective work. So I started going to therapy, sought counseling, and it was through that I mentioned the patterns to him. And I was like, I'm consistently noticing myself repeating these patterns in romantic relationship, and I can see it showing up elsewhere in my life. And he's like, well, what do you attribute that to? What do you think's behind that? And I'm like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started going back into my childhood to try to find a catalyst, if you will, like a reason, the mental point of origin for when this all started. And I started listing out the more painful experiences in my life. And I'll never forget, I kind of glossed over the experience. And he said, wait, go back. What happened exactly? And I thought he didn't hear me.
Mm-hmm.
So I repeated myself, and I'll never forget the look on his face. He was disgusted and disturbed. And it was in that moment where I was like, oh, that was not what I've made it out to be, was it?
Mm.
And he's like, well, have you ever thought about what that was? And I was like, not really. He's like, and I'm like, that was abuse, wasn't it? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, oh, no wonder I'm showing up the way that I'm showing up. No wonder I have such a difficult time when it comes to elevating in different areas of my life, because this constantly is blocking me. Because all of those things require, on some inherent level, they require a high depth of intimacy. If you're going to excel in career or in finances, you've got to be intimate with your business. You've got to be intimate with what it takes to be successful in your career. You have to be intimate with your budget, with saving, with investing. All of these things require intimacy, especially in romantic relationship. But intimacy felt like a threat within my system. So whenever I would go past a certain degree, the threshold that existed within me that notified me, okay, this is safe, this is not safe,
Mm-hmm.
I would need to self-sabotage.
Yeah.
And so it was through that work that I started to recognize all of the different ways in which I masked in an effort to hide, to ensure that the abuse never happened again.
Mm.
But the issue is and you kind of alluded to this earlier, when we push away love, or excuse me, when we push away rejection, we also push away acceptance.
Right.
It's the law of polarity. Everything in the universe has an opposite. There are simply two sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
When we push away failure, we also simultaneously push away success. They go together.
Mm-hmm.
And so when in coaching people, right, it's the cave you fear to enter that holds the treasure that you seek. You ultimately have to step into what it is that you fear the most if you hope to have a breakthrough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is quite a scary place to be if you don't know what's in that cave, right? And many of us imagine that monster that's hiding underneath the bed, per se, is gonna gobble us up and eat us. And I'm curious, what was your experience of going into that cave, and actually, what did you find there?
Well, it was horrible, as you can imagine, because at the end of the day, what I was really avoiding was the painful emotions attached to the experience.
Right.
That's what most people are trying to avoid. And that's why I always tell my clients the breakthroughs that you're looking for are found on the other side of the things that you avoid.
Mm-hmm.
Most specifically, the emotions that you consistently avoid. Because the incident for me, as you can probably imagine, created a lot of bitterness, resentment, anger, frustration, sadness, grief, humiliation, shame. So what I was really avoiding was feeling the burden and the weight of those emotions. And so by not addressing it, by not acknowledging it for what it was, I was able to do that. The problem is that all I was doing was repressing and suppressing those emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So I was still living with them. I was still carrying them around with me. I just, ignorance is bliss, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I feel like most people are doing that on some level and to some degree, because the primary goal of the ego is to maintain the status quo. How does it do that? It does so by hiding the truth from you.
Mm-hmm.
The truth for me was that this moment was a catalyst in my development, in my psychological development as, a young adolescent, that ultimately shaped and molded so many different aspects of my personality that I just continued to carry around. And until I was able to bring the unconscious to the conscious level, I was going to be stuck in this rut, in this pattern. And I think Carl Jung put it so perfectly when he said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it'll continue to direct your life, and you will call it fate.
Yeah, that quote is so true. And every time I hear it, I'm like, ding, 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 he's right on the money, because we think this is just how I am. This is
Right.
just who I am.
Mm-hmm.
This is just how life is. It's like, no.
Mm-hmm.
This is an unconscious pattern that is just showing up in all of these aspects of your life. It's
Right.
actually not who you are at all. And the willingness to look at that and get curious about that
Mm-hmm.
is the work.
It is the work. Yeah. And I love that it's starting to become more mainstream and widely accepted.
Mm-hmm.
The conversations that we're having around mental health. I mean, May was Mental Health Awareness Month. June is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. And so it's starting to become mainstream, and it's definitely picking up steam when it comes to how do we have a conversation about holistic health and how that impacts us. Mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, not just physical health or relational health.
Right.
We have to have all of these different things and address all of these different things, because one without the rest is always going to be incomplete and insufficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what so many people, I think, get so frustrated, because they're working on one aspect of that, and then they continue to, feel stuck, or maybe make progress in one area, but all these other areas have been left unaddressed.
Right.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, for you, what the role of trust was with as it pertained to this experience, and then how it played out in your relationships with yourself, but also with other people. Because an event like that, I would imagine, has directly impacts how much we trust other people.
Oh, of course.
How did you start to bridge that gap between the rupture that happened
Mm-hmm.
and thinking that people are safe and I can
Mm-hmm.
trust you and it's safe to be close? And how do you start to bridge that gap and rebuild trust when it's been broken?
Well, the short answer is healing.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I did this work, the more I felt safe to let go of these different compensating strategies or these different masks that I had historically worn in an effort to be loved, accepted, and successful. So the more I did this work, the more I was able to let those things go, the more I was able to step into what I was afraid of. The more I was able to step into love, intimacy, and connection, those things that were inherently scary because of the incident that I desperately did not want to repeat again. So I became very used to self-protecting, to masking, or what I would call performing, right? Playing a part, playing a role that is not me, it's who I think I need to be.
Mm-hmm.
The more permission over time I gave myself to be who I really am and to be seen for who I really am, the more I was able to step into trust, which is why our life, our relationships, our business expand in direct proportion to our felt sense of safety.
Yeah.
Two things cannot occupy the same space at the same time. So whenever we're self-protecting, it's very difficult and arguably impossible to put yourself out there and step into true vulnerability, which is a necessary component of cultivating and building a greater degree of intimacy. So we have to let go, we have to heal, we have to reconcile the pain from the past if we hope to not recycle it in the present moment, so that we can start to create a different narrative and therefore different results.
Yeah, definitely. I'm wondering for the people that are in relationship right now and they're listening to you and maybe they're starting or have identified that there's something that's blocking them from being able to go all in or to be fully committed or to just lean into receiving love at a deeper level. And do you think that this healing work has to happen outside of relationship, or is it something that can happen in partnership as well?
Well, I think at the end of the day, in order for transformation to, I hesitate to say be complete, it has to be applied within the context of relationship because we're relational beings. Emotional intelligence, which has constantly been proven to be the key to success in all areas of life, has different phases. So there's, of course, self-awareness and self-management. So becoming aware of my patterns, becoming aware of my limiting beliefs, becoming aware of the things that stop me and the internal biases that I have that hold me back in life. And then, okay, once I become aware of those things and I start to work through them and reconcile them, how do I start to manage myself within the context of the relationship that I have with me and everything in my life? The next stage is social awareness, social management. How do my patterns, how do my limiting beliefs, how does that show up within the context of relationship? And then once I have that awareness, how do I bring myself, how do I show up differently within the context of relationship to be the match for that which I seek? Because I have to become the highest example of the behavior that I seek in another if I hope to attract it. I have to.
Yeah.
So you can do all the work on yourself with a therapist, with a coach, whatever it may be. But until you start to actively apply that within the context of relationship, it is going to be incomplete.
Right. Well, it's theory.
Correct.
Right. It's like I've learned about it, I've read about it, I've talked about it, but I haven't used it or applied it in real life scenarios.
Which is one of the biggest tricks of the ego, is upon increasing your conscious awareness, thinking that change or transformation has actually taken place, when in fact, all you have is a new level of awareness. You haven't actually applied or integrated or embodied that awareness insofar that it fundamentally shifts who you be, your character, your behavior, and therefore your results.
Because it doesn't matter, you guys. I feel like you're aware of the pattern, or you're aware of how to shift the pattern, or whatever that like looks like. If nothing changes in the way that you actually show up in
Right.
in relationship, and this doesn't have to be romantic, it can be friendships, it can be work, or like you were
Right.
saying, it doesn't matter, but it's in the experience and that things actually shift when we actually choose to come face to face with intimacy, and we don't run away, and we actually lean in, or we actually say the thing that we're scared to say instead of masking it with I'm fine and things are good and this persona.
Yep.
Right? It's that happens on the battlefield of life, not in the classroom.
The way I like to put it is true transformation is always predicated on dying to something. The new always demands the death of the familiar, which is where the ego hides so well.
Yeah.
Most people step into growth, they increase in awareness, and they think they've changed, when in reality you have had several epiphanies, which allow you to connect the dots, which is an important first step. It really is, but it's merely a first step. You have to work to integrate that within the context of relationships and community if you want to see a foundational or fundamental change in your life. Transformation is always meant to extend from the I to the we to the all. It has to.
Yeah. How did integrating that, moving from just awareness to application, what did that look like practically in your relationships when you started to use the information you understood in your mind?
Sure. So obviously, you know my girlfriend, Carrie. When we first moved in together, she has 2 children from a previous marriage. The level of intimacy just went, because now we live together and we're exposed to each other every day. And now I've got 2 little kids that I'm helping co-parent. So the level of intimacy far exceeded my threshold of what I felt was safe. And so in many ways, my body, my nervous system was like, dude, get out of here. So even though consciously I knew I was safe, I didn't feel safe in my system. I didn't feel safe in my body. It's similar to someone who has a near-death experience while swimming in the ocean. They're going to be very, very hesitant to get back into the ocean because they've experienced a challenging cycle, and now their focus is on not repeating that challenging cycle. And so they're constantly going back into the past. And when you're constantly going back into the past, it's incredibly hard to create and step into a vision for the future.
Absolutely.
So, and I think most people are self-protecting in that type of way. They just don't realize it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we're recreating, our brains are so smart in the way to protect us and to keep us alive. And it takes our past experience and projects it onto the future as a potential threat as to avoid that happening to keep you alive. So it's done its job. Right.
Yeah.
But it's also prevented you and is blocking you from experiencing what you want to experience. So like in that same vein of like, okay, I'm moving in with Carrie. I'm now responsible for I've got more responsibility and closeness than ever before. And I'm also feeling flooded with
completely flooded.
This, I don't know if I can have the capacity for all of this.
Yep.
What does integrating and applying in relationship look like from like a practical day-to-day example? When you want to run, what does staying look like?
It's a good question. I think the most important, the first question that you get to ask yourself is, what are we up to? What are we doing? For Carrie and myself, our intention is to step deeper into a relationship, deeper into commitment, and to expand in our love for each other and our relationship. Then comes the question, how much of this can I do and still feel safe? Because like you mentioned, it felt when I initially moved in with her just too much, too soon, too fast. And it arguably was. Hindsight's always 20/20.
Sure.
No one ever prepares you for becoming a parent, let alone a co-parent. But you have to answer this question of how much of this can I do and still feel safe. We want to stretch the muscle. We don't want to strain it.
Yeah.
To use physical fitness as a metaphor, when you go to the gym, it's very normal to feel sore for a day, 2, maybe 3. But if you feel sore for 2 to 3 weeks after your workout, you probably pushed it too far. You probably injured yourself. So we want to stretch the muscle. We don't want to strain it. How do we know whether or not we strained ourselves? It's the timetable of recovery. How long does it take to recover? And so we have to start to, I hesitate to say experiment, but we have to start to test our limits in terms of what we feel capable of and what we feel safe to step into and therefore receive. But we also have to know when it's too much, too soon, too fast, so that we can dial it down or dial it back a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. This is just so important for those that are like at home listening to this and they're like, I don't want to recreate the same experience that that I've had, right?
Sure.
I can take radical responsibility. I can recognize that I'm the common denominator in every relationship and moment in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't like how I'm feeling, it's up to me to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
But also recognizing that isn't always a straight and narrow path.
No. Well, paradoxically, the way up is the way down. Transformation is much more about unbecoming, unlearning than it is about learning or developing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's the return back to our true self, our authenticity.
Yeah.
The catalyst being pain. But most of us are running away from pain, when in reality, pain is the doorway to purpose. It is the doorway to our power.
Yeah.
It's meant to develop and mold us. Most of us think that our mountains are meant to be conquered so that we can claim victory over them, when in reality, that often has us bypass our pain. When in reality, our mountains are meant to mold us, to shape us. The same is true for our pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it says the pain stops when the truth starts. Did you ever experience being honest? And I think here's the thing. A lot of us, we share our truth maybe when we're young, and it's painful.
Yeah.
We're not received.
Mm-hmm.
We're rejected. We're laughed at. We're
Yeah.
bullied. How do we reconcile that as adults when we're trying to do this work and we're like, okay, I want to start to be honest. I want to, whether it's with my partner, whether it's with myself, about where I am and how, if I'm really okay and if I really enjoy the life that I've built. And if not, am I willing to be honest and answer the question and say no? That can also be painful. So how do you reconcile that? Because it's like, does the pain go away as soon as you're honest, or can it also create pain that you have to sit with and deal with?
Well, admittedly, the title is incomplete, in many ways. We can't heal something until we're willing to reveal it. And by reveal it in this instance, I mean, we have to be honest about how it truly impacted and affected us. Which, of course, means that we have to acknowledge how painful and impactful it was.
Yeah.
So it starts with acknowledge. I mean, I've never been through a 12-step program, but I think it provides a really beautiful structure for how to approach this, which is the first of the 12 steps is acknowledging my addiction and that I am powerless over it. I think for most people, when it comes to their pain, and Gabor Mate has a beautiful way of describing this, if you're familiar. He says, the wrong question is why the addiction, the right question is why the pain. Because we're all addicted to something. With alcoholics, it's fairly apparent. The rest of us are just better at hiding it. The pain stops when the truth starts. In spirit and in essence, says, the moment that I acknowledge what happened and how it impacted me, then I can do something about it.
Yeah.
That's the only time I can actually heal it, is by admitting how painful it actually was and how it impacted me.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was being with the fact that this was abuse and this was humiliating because, and if for those of you who end up reading my book, it didn't happen in secret or in silence. It happened in front of a bunch of people. And so I was bullied after the fact throughout middle school and high school for this event. I grew up in a town of 1,000 people, right? And if you grow up in a town of 1,000 people, everyone knows your business. Everyone finds out about everything. And so it followed me around like this dark cloud, and it became kind of intertwined with my reputation. Oh, this is Jake. He was, taken advantage of in this way, and da 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 da. And I was made fun of for it. And so it wasn't until I acknowledged just how painful that actually was, because all I wanted to do after it happened was run away from it.
Sure.
Which I think is common when you're 12 or 13. You don't have the mental resources to know what to do with that amount of pain. And so you dissociate, which is to simply say you repress the pain. It wasn't until that I acknowledged it for what it was that I was actually able to start to wrestle with and work through and ultimately reconcile the painful emotions that I had simply spent so long avoiding and performing my way around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, another way to think about that is just living in a constant state of denial, right? Of just like that didn't happen, or that didn't really affect me, or it wasn't a big deal.
Sure.
Right? All the stories that we tell ourselves to try and convince not just other people, but try to convince ourselves so that we can try to sleep peacefully at night.
Well, no one teaches us how to grieve in this culture. In many ways, I had to teach myself how to do that. Or I needed the support of somebody else. And I think that's in many ways by design, because I don't think we can reach our full potential alone. We need a support system.
Absolutely.
Every hero needs a guide. I needed the support from therapists, from coaches, because I've worked with many, to point out my blind spots, to make me aware of the patterns that I was playing out in my life, in relationship, in my business, when it came to my health, etc., so that I could start to work through those things, because I wanted more for myself. I wanted more for my life. And I knew that on some deep inherent level, I've always been meant to have an impact. I think everyone has a higher purpose. I do. I think we're all here for a specific reason. And, to quote Leo Tolstoy, without knowing who I am and why I'm here, life is impossible. But pain blocks us from accessing purpose and living up to our true potential.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way to access those things is through pain.
Well, it's like the only way out is through.
The way up is the way down.
Yeah. And I wish we could sit here and tell you guys that there was another way. Right? I wish we could say, here's just you can avoid it and it will go away, but unfortunately that's not the case.
Right. Well, if you think about a muscle, what has to happen in order for a muscle to grow? It has to tear first. We are no different. We're no different. We just have a very dysfunctional relationship with pain, because we think of it as, we judge it. We think it's bad. We think it's wrong, which are all just judgments. When in reality, light and dark go together. Two sides of the same coin. Failure and success, they go together. Pain and prosperity, they also go together. When you push away one, you push away both. Most people, that's what they're doing. They just don't have the language for it. They don't have the resources for how to navigate it in an effective way, because eventually you come out on the other side of it.
Yeah.
Just like anything.
Yeah.
If you sit with any emotion long enough, eventually that emotion just goes away.
Mm-hmm.
The same is true with our pain.
Yeah.
We need to befriend our pain, not avoid it.
I totally agree. I couldn't agree more, because I think we live in a culture that tells us that pain is our enemy.
Totally.
And I had to learn that pain is not my enemy. It's actually my teacher.
Absolutely.
The enemy actually is not learning the lesson that the pain came to teach me.
And we live in this high performance culture, which is bent on accomplishment, achievement, making something of yourself, which sets you up. It tees you up for a life of performance. So what do you end up doing? You end up suppressing and repressing these less than ideal qualities and characteristics about yourself, painful events that have happened to you in the past, and then you posture and position the more ideal qualities and characteristics about yourself, right? And everybody wants to be an influencer, right?
Yeah.
Right. So this is incredibly prevalent, especially on social media.
Right.
We see this all over the place. That creates a pressure cooker. It creates a pressure cooker, which means that you're going to need a coping mechanism to relieve the pressure. And that's where we see people get and form addictions.
Absolutely. Or numb or distract or go on to the next best thing or
Right.
whatever it might be.
Absolutely. Whether it's, pornography, drugs, or alcohol, but there's a lot of other addictions
Absolutely.
that are much more easily justifiable, and therefore we can kind of hide them.
Work being one of them.
Working out, health and fitness, diet and nutrition, caretaking for others, which is just a covert form of people pleasing in many cases, not in all cases, but in many. And so when you see this, you start to realize that this high performance culture that we are brought up in and that we're taught to essentially idolize is teeing us up to perform, to mask, to hide. And the statistics prove that. Last year, over 350 million prescriptions were written for anti-anxiety medication in the United States alone. 1 in 5 men report not having any significant close male friendships. That's startling. It's startling.
Yeah.
So this performer persona that on some level we all play until we really start to do this work, it has us trapped. It has us stuck, playing this part, playing this role that is not actually us, but who we think we need to be in order to be loved, accepted, and successful, that separates us from who we truly are and therefore creates this internal conflict or turmoil within ourselves. And we're just at odds with ourselves. I mean, how many times have you heard in the coaching space, you're the biggest thing in your way?
Right.
Right. Exactly.
Absolutely.
You're the biggest thing in your way. And there's a lot of truth to that, but people don't know, okay, how do I get out of my own way then?
Right.
Nobody wants to hear the answer to that question because everyone wants the resurrection, but nobody wants the crucifixion. Everyone wants to get to heaven, but nobody wants to die.
Right. It's so true. It's so true. Well, and everyone wants to let love in, but no one wants to deal with their pain. And I think part of the messaging out there for men, which I hope that we are starting to shift the narrative around, is that men, like a lot of men are told, it's like your manliness is based on how much you can endure alone.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm curious, like, what do you say to the men out there that are listening, that maybe have suffered in silence and have bought into the lie that they have to endure these things alone, and if they've been through something like you, that they can't tell anybody, or that if they do, that makes them weak, like, or whether it's men or women, like, who is this book really for, and what do you hope is the thing that they get out of it the most?
Well, to quote the dedication in the beginning of the book, this book is to all men who have ever experienced abuse but have never felt safe enough to share. And so my hope for this book, leaders go first. And I'll be the first person to say that I'm definitely a faulty human, but my reasoning for writing this book was to serve as a blueprint, a guidebook, an inspiration for other people to step into their healing journey and to go down this path. Because if you really want the life that you say you want, if you really want to accomplish the goals that you set out to, you first have to start by looking at the things that are standing in between you and doing those things.
What's life like right now for you, now that you've been able to let more love into your life than ever before?
Well, it's certainly a lot more easeful, and I know peace. And I think that's, at the end of the day, what we're all after. so many people have success, but they don't know peace. And I think that's one of the biggest tragedies that isn't talked about enough in our society. Paradoxically, my most successful clients are also the most unhappy. I'm sure you've experienced that many, many times with your clients as well. And so when you think about that, you realize very quickly that our greatest strength, or whatever it is that we rely upon in order to create success, is really just an adaptation or an overcompensation to avoid experiencing pain.
Yeah. This is going to change lives, Jake. I mean, you know how much admiration, I hope you know how much admiration I have for you and for your willingness to bear it all and to be really real. And I think you do that with this. I think you do it really, really
Thank you.
well. And I think men and women everywhere who get this book are going to have more access to love than they did before. And I think that alone makes the world a much better place. So thank you for your willingness to be honest, for your willingness to go first.
Thank you.
And for sharing this with us and giving us a blueprint to let more love into our lives so that we can have the lives that we really want. Where can people find this, and where can they get it, and where can they find out more about you online?
I appreciate you asking. So the best place to pick up the book is on Amazon. Let Love In, Jacob Kauffman, Kauffman. You can also get it via my website, which is awakewithjake.com. You can sign up for our email list, stay tuned and get updated. And if you want to interact with me and connect with me, you can do so best via my Instagram page, which is I am Jake Kauffman. Again, that's Kauffman.
We're going to make sure to make it super easy and accessible to everybody listening. We'll put all of that information in the show notes for you. So all you have to do is go click the link so you can buy your copy of Let Love In. I'm so excited for you, my friend, and appreciate your time and your willingness to travel out and spend some time with me. I love you and Carrie so much, and you'll have such a dear place in my heart and really dear friends. So thank you. You
Thank
guys,
you so much for having me.
Of course. Until next week, I hope you will share this episode with a friend, maybe someone who is struggling, who wants more love in their life. Maybe that's you, but maybe that's also someone you know and is needing to remove the barriers that are blocking them from love. This would be an amazing gift that you could give them just by sharing this episode. And you can also leave us a rating and review if you have ever taken anything away from one of these conversations and found it valuable. I ask that you would just take 5 short minutes to leave us a rating and review on Apple or Spotify, and make sure to follow us on YouTube because you can watch how we interact and the dynamics of in-studio conversations like this one if you go over to our YouTube channel. In the meantime, go apply what you've learned this week. Go be coachable. We'll see you next week on the Coachable Podcast.